Good morning. This is Faith in Our Hometown, brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin. And now, here's your host, Father Jay Friedel.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Faith in Our Hometown, our Sunday conversation about things that matter to us here in the greater Joplin area, and especially for any of us who might be people of faith or people who just want to know about people of faith. For Christians, we're getting very close to our celebration of Easter. So 1 week from today, it'll be Easter Sunday. Many Christians throughout the way that they celebrate kind of an event today called Passion Sunday or Palm Sunday. So it's one of those days we do giveaways in the Catholic Church. So if you really need some, you still got 11:15 Mass, or whatever. But we're going to talk a little bit about Palm Sunday, Passion Sunday, and what role suffering plays in our lives. And here to talk about that with me is one of my favorite guests, Aaron Brown, who's the pastor over at St. Paul's United Methodist Church. Aaron hasn't been on the show for a while, and when I said, Aaron, how'd you like to talk about suffering? He said, sure, kind of. Okay, so we'll be right back after this Mercy Minute. Stick around.
My name is JT Amos. Basically, if there's food inside of this hospital, I'm responsible for it. At 332 pounds, I would always order the biggest meal so I could feel full at the end of it. Since I'm an executive chef, it's about my relationship with food. I'm gonna try that, and then I'm gonna try it again, and I'm gonna try it again, and I'm gonna try it again. Now I try it because it's part of the job, and then I let it go. I've always been a very physical person, never let my weight get in my way, but I would suffer the next day, and I would suffer that night because I'd be in just so much pain, my legs would hurt. Now I can do 2 or 3 days in a row and not really hurt. I play with my 5-year-old daughter, we go ride roller coasters, we go do things now. A journey is what it was. I chose Mercy for bariatric surgery because I want somebody to be with me through a lifetime. So if I am going off the rails for them to go, JT, you need to come back over, look at what you're doing. And everything just goes into place, and it's truly you're a better person.
Well, good morning again, and thanks for joining us for another Sunday morning here at Faith in Our Hometown. My guest this morning, Aaron Brown, who's the pastor.
Good to be here.
It has been ages, my friend, since you've been here.
Too long, yeah. I'm curious, you said you had giveaways?
Well, yes. There are 2 times out of the year when people show up just because we got free giveaways at church. And one is Ash Wednesday, when we give out ashes.
Free ashes.
People come in, and you'd think, I have people that I haven't seen all year long. Yeah. So at the beginning of this Lenten season, that we're now getting almost ready to end, and then Palm Sunday, when we give out palms to everybody. It's just an old Catholic tradition where we would have blessed palms in the home to remind us of that Jesus' entry into Jerusalem right before he suffered and died. And those palms then were kind of used as reminders to us and, kind of an aid to prayer, kind of. Yeah. A lot of times you'll walk into a Catholic home and you'll see them tucked behiin pictures or whatever. Now,
bookmarks, a lot of times bookmarks
and things like that. But I will even tell you in the old days.
Wait, how old are the old days?
My great grandparents.
Okay.
All right, so we're talking like 100 years ago. People would actually also then burn them and scatter the ashes as protection before storms and things like that.
Really?
So yeah, it's really there's some old traditions related with it. Again, we got so scientific and everything, but the whole point behind them was because they were used as an object for prayer. It obviously wasn't magic or a talisman or something. But it was kind of a,
tactile, tactile to call you to prayer. Sure.
Yep, exactly.
When I was a kid, we would, on Palm Sunday, we would parade around the inside of the sanctuary with palm branches and sing the song Hosanna, Loud Hosanna.
Oh yeah.
Is that a thing?
Well, we don't do Hosanna, Loud Hosanna. And we'd sing Hosanna rather, it's a difference in the way that we pronounce those Latin or Hebrew in that regard, and so we would do that. But there was always ways to sing certain things, and we'd always sing Hosanna. We'd never sing Hosanna.
Hosanna,
that would just be the wrong.
Where were you raised?
Choir director.
Where were you raised?
I was raised in, St. Louis area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I was in the Kansas City area.
Yeah,
so we were Hosannas, you were Hosannas.
Well, Missouri,
Protestant, Catholic,
maybe it has to do the whole thing.
Reformation, whatever. Yeah.
I love it. So, but at any rate, we do the processions too. Ideally, if like I say, some Sundays, or in some places, if it can be done well, we actually do have. It's a Sunday where it's a little longer because, of course, we read the Lord's Passion from the Gospels. This year we're reading from Luke. Okay, since we're in year C. And then on Good Friday, next week, we'll read from John, because we always do it kind of that way. So we'll do Matthew 1 year, Mark 1 year, Luke 1 year, and then the next year we do John. But we usually have the procession then, and
Nice.
usually process from one place into church. A lot of times if we can do it that way,
With
sometimes
palms, on
with the
Palm
palms and everything. And again, singing one of the versions of the Hosanna to the Son of David, the King of Israel. The great requote from the Scriptures. But that again, singing what they sang when Jesus went into Jerusalem at that point in time, kind of re-entered into our words, our new person. He entered into his own city of triumph, but also the city of his passion and death, which was his ultimate triumph in a different way. And that sets us up for what we said we were going to talk about today,
Suffering.
which is suffering.
Yeah.
Because, suffering is one of those things that none of us really look for, but it finds all of us.
If you're going to be human, you're going to suffer.
Exactly.
Bad things are going to happen.
You cannot avoid it. That's just, and again, I really believe that that's part of the only why did Jesus become human anyway? Why did God become a human being? Why did that happen? At least in the Christian view of things. And for those of you who aren't, well, you're just going to have to put up with us talking about this morning, because this is our thing. But I hope that even our conversation will help raise some things for you, the way you think about suffering in your own tradition. But for us, God becomes a human being, so God does suffer. God does die, actually, in the Christian story, the Christian mythos. Yeah.
Well, and I think, when we talk about suffering and we think about Jesus in this week of suffering, and Christ on the cross, Christ being scourged, betrayed, I think all that parallels for us the understanding of our own suffering, just like you said, that we are going to go through that. But we can't ever look at God and I think shake our fist at the sky and say, why am I suffering? I mean, we can. I think that's a part of the faith. It's a very human part.
Part of the human response.
So
but yeah,
we can definitely do that, but we also have to connect that to the fact that, the Lord that we're seeking to follow, didn't have it easy either. Sometimes I think we think, even when we're maturing in our faith, we can begin to think, gosh, I've chosen to follow Jesus. I've made sacrifices. I've given this part of my life, or all of my life. Shouldn't I be a little bit protected from the hard stuff?
And I think that's one of the things that God shows us is that that God didn't protect himself from the ultimate piece of being human, which is that you suffer and you die. I mean, and
Jesus himself said, he said, "In this world you will have suffering, but take heart. You will have trouble." He said, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world." And I think that's the process. I am overcoming the world.
I think that sometimes we think that God, is the exception to everything, and that is one way of looking at things. But I really think that God isn't the exception to suffering. I think that because God's God, I think God's probably suffered more than the rest of us. Personally, I mean, that's just my way of kind of looking at it or giving it a little. You
mean like that God experiences the suffering
twist,
we do,
if you will.
If we suffer, the loving God of grace and mercy experiences that suffering too?
I think he suffers along with us. I think that even more so, I think he suffers in the sense of, because I mean, once God became a human being, that part of God has all those human emotions. The other part of God the creator or whatever, might not suffer in the same way that we have those emotions or those feelings or things, but Jesus did. Yeah. Jesus couldn't help but, because he's now got a human, I mean, he doesn't,
fully human.
This is
one of the mysteries,
human.
right?
Yeah.
Fully God, fully human.
Yeah.
And to be fully human means to fully experience everything, the joy, the pain,
That's right.
betrayal.
Right. And I mean, and I think we sometimes forget that, how unique that is, that God has actually come here to be with us and to live it as one of us. That part of God that is Jesus, that came to earth, is, I mean, that's a unique moment for any of us who are, claim Christianity as our window of reality. That was a defining moment for us.
I wonder, about suffering. A lot of times, when it comes to suffering, people say things like, "Everything happens for a reason." That was one of the questions that I think kept me from having an active faith. Is, well, if everything happens for a reason, and people saying that kind of very trivially, if everything happens for a reason, then the suffering I'm going through is something that God's making me go through. What do you think about that?
Well, there's one thing I've always said to people: you always at least have to realize that God's at least letting it happen, even if He's not making it happen. Okay? Because I'm not so sure that I believe in a God that says, "Oh, I think it's Aaron's time in the barrel. Let's let Aaron suffer a little bit today."
I think it's your turn, or Andrew's turn. Yeah,
or somebody's turn.
Yeah.
But I think that you can't, because of because of who we are, because of how this whole thing unfolded for us as created beings, we wouldn't know. We don't know life without suffering anymore. And I really think that that's the only sense that I can have for God even becoming a human being is that He would never have been one with us if He hadn't gone through what we chose to go through. Well, not what He chose for us, but what we chose to go through. And now in some ways, God follows us into humanity to in some ways save us from, in an ultimate way to save us from ourselves. Yeah. But I think so. When people get frustrated or upset or shake their fist at God and say, "Why are you letting this happen to me?" I think it's a very real human emotion. I think it's a very real, normal response. I don't know, again, that I would say so much that God is making it happen, but God certainly is allowing it, because God could intervene at some point in time.
Well, but you say God allowing it, isn't that the God allowing us to have free will? So much of our suffering, right, is things that I choose to do to myself. And again, this depends on your theological angle that you're looking at this.
Right.
If you're kind of a theological determinism, then it's like, well, no, God has a plan. God, if it snows because God says it's going to snow, it rains because God says it's going to rain. If you have bad things happen in your life, it's because God's doing those things to you. And that theological determinism means you don't really have a free will. You simply think you do.
Right.
But I'm not a theological determinist. So
yeah.
And the other end of
it might have been more fun to have this conversation with another person who might have thought that way. But
the other end of the spectrum is what is it called? Deism, where God created all that is. It's still an understanding of God, a spirituality. God created all that is, but God, is the absentee landlord.
Right.
Got it all going. I'm out of here. The other one is that God's the micromanager.
Yep.
God's the absentee landlord. So
pulling the strings on the puppet.
And where I would see is that there's some place in the middle there, where yes, God is in control, but I also have a free will, and that the question then becomes, what of my suffering is of my own doing or your doing? Because you also have a free will, and you can choose to make things happen that make me suffer.
Which, again, if we go back to the very beginning, we would say that's the whole point of, the fall from creation and the goodness that God created in creation, when we chose to be gods rather than to just be who we were and who we were created.
Talking about the Garden of Eden, the story of the fall.
Yep.
Right.
And again, our choice, our free will.
So the Roman Catholic tradition is one of believing that people have free will.
Oh yes, okay. without a doubt. I know you come, obviously you just already stated
couple of steps,
right? Yep. And I think that free will created all that suffering in the first place. I mean, we could have stayed, and I mean this symbolically, symbolically we could have stayed in the garden if we had chosen just to live that way. So there we have a situation that we chose. Speaking of choices, I'm going to choose to take a break at this particular moment. It's going to be a quick one, but don't go away. We're going to be right back after a quick break. This is our quick one, so, stretch break, but nothing else. We'll be right back.
You're watching Faith in Our Hometown on KSN TV, brought to you as a community service of Mercy Hospital, Joplin.
Well, again, my guest this morning, Aaron Brown, who's the pastor over at St. Paul's United Methodist Church, and we've been talking a little bit about the role of suffering in certainly within the Christian worldview. or at least a couple of Christians' worldviews.
Yeah.
And again, we are all over the place. I mean, I always laugh when when somebody says, "Well, I'm Christian." Well, it means you know this much about somebody. The basic, and you probably know one of the most important things that they would use to define themselves, which is all very important. But theologically, that can be anywhere. It can be all over the map. I always laugh. I just say, put more than 2 Catholics in a room, you're going to have at least 6 opinions.
Or Methodists, or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
Right. Well, one of the things that not to get too personal here, but when talking about suffering, what are some of the times you've suffered most in life? God, I love the fact that you do this to me on this show, which is kind of entertaining. But I would say probably, I think you can look back to the deaths of people that you loved, and those are sometimes the worst moments in life. But because you just feel that vacuum where that person always was, and especially the death of parents or siblings or close friends. But I'm going to pick one. Have all those happened to you?
Oh,
your parents' death,
both my parents and my brother, and so I'm the last one in my family. And again, people here in this own community that I've served for years, and you fall in love with people, and you serve them, and you share life, and all of a sudden, bang. But I think the one that I'm gonna go to, because it was probably until I started to experience death, the most painful moment I suffered, and that was years ago. I got into a power struggle with the rector of the seminary where I was. And so I was 18 years old. And I still to this day think I was in the right. But when you're an 18-year-old and you're in the seminary, the rector holds all the power cards and you have none. And so we got into this struggle, and basically he said that I had to take time out from the seminary, And I was just I knew from the time I was in grade school I was going to go be a priest, and that was going to be that. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of all this, even in the midst of wanting to serve God and be close to Him and do all that stuff, I was suddenly bounced out on my ear. Now, of course, obviously, as you can tell, I went back. And
so what's a nice way to put it? They invited you to leave?
Yeah, they invited me.
Made you available to industry?
Actually, the real words, if you really want to know the whole quote, which is really kind of funny when I look back on it, because I was told I was not the cancer that was being cut out, but I was the cauterization of the wound. It was December 20.
That's a phrase you kind of remember. You lock that one in, don't you?
It was December 21st, 1979, but I'm not bitter. But when I look back on all that, I was mad at God for a long time after that. Because my whole thing was, all I ever wanted to do was to serve you.
Why did you not stop this, God?
Yeah, why did you? And I believe God can intervene in time and space, and we call those miracles.
Right.
But He didn't. And so God and I we had a rough few months there, where I still went to church and everything, but I wasn't talking to Him very much. I wasn't very happy with Him, and I know now when I'm dealing with a family that loses a little one. I know now when somebody suffers a loss, or somebody gets a diagnosis, or something that basically is terminal, and I know those things. It's just like I know when I wind up back in that spot that I'm not I'm not very happy with them, and it's a hard way to do some of those things. I know how to be with them in that space because of what I went through.
Right. And I think that's where, there's an old phrase that God does not let His children shed a needless tear. Am I getting that right? You know what I'm talking about?
I think it's Kabbalah. I think it might actually be Jewish. But I think it might be Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism. But yeah, that's close, I think, if I'm remembering.
God doesn't let suffering go to waste. I've heard it put that way too. That when we suffer, not that God causes it, but God can take the suffering we have and bend it
and transform it
into something good.
And
that's hard to believe or hard to embrace when you're going through something difficult.
I even said to to some of the people who lost people after the tornado that I was so upset with God during that time, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know what it was like. You guys got hammered. And how many people did we lose? 151. It's just like
61,
161, and I'm like, and I just remember saying to everybody, it's just like, I'm not really on very good speaking terms with God right now, but I know He's going to wheedle His way back into my heart And then I thought a few other things after that they're not
hound
fit
of
for
heaven.
the air. They're not fit for air on a.
Go ahead,
on a
Satan.
No! Don't be tempted. Get behind me, Satan. All right, but I'm just saying but it's part of who we are, and that's part of the richness of our lives. I mean, and in so many ways, and you never use these platitudes with people when they're there,
Right.
But what would what would I know about joy if I'd not also experienced some sorrow? I'm gonna say this facetiously. Now this I will say, and I'm gonna get dinged for it, I know. But I mean, in some ways I look back at and think what life was like in the garden, and I was like, well, what would we have known? I get joy, but I mean, we wouldn't have known the full depth and breadth of what we can experience as human beings without the fall, which is in a week from now when I'll be singing "Oh Happy Fault, O Felix Culpa, Oh Happy Fault, O Necessary Sin of Adam, that won for us so great a Redeemer," in one of our songs. It's just like, I know, it's
That's
just like,
deep.
and it calls "Oh Happy Fault," and it's just like, whoa. And we've been calling it that since the first, second century, where people are going, that was our happy fault, because if we had not even in some way screwed it up, how would we know the joy of having Jesus?
I see a flaw in that logic, but I get it. Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead. You go ahead. Just jump right in there.
Oh.
With your own suffering, with a flaw in my logic. That's why we're having this show.
Yeah, I should be careful what I ask. Probably the thing that I've struggled with most of my life is depression. Just having seasonal, not seasonal, but seasons of. So, what I've seen is about every 3 or 4 years, I go through a significant time of depression and darkness. In fact, I call it that. I call it the darkness, and where it's personal suffering, and it's usually tied to the suffering of somebody else. Sometimes there are events that happen that bring that sense of gloom and suffering in the sense of, God, where are you? What are you doing? What do you do?
And what
why does this linger? Those times when, as a pastor, I wonder, am I even supposed to be doing this? And
what's the point?
What is the point? And then, as a pastor too, moving with so many people through their suffering, and I often find that I move with people through those difficult times of suffering. I feel like parts of their suffering stick to me. Does that resonate with that?
It feels that way to me too.
And there are times when that grief gets so heavy that
it's hard to bear some days.
It is. So, and having gone through the death of my father-in-law recently, and the seeing that suffering and moving through that, issues with being a parent and the kids that God has blessed me with, and those issues. It's just I think there's always something.
Yeah. And again, I think we stand in those moments when we are the most real, because those are the places where we're raw as human beings. And I think we stand in those places, and and we wait for God's transformation. We wait for God to what was the word you used? Bend that, in a way. Because I do believe. I usually say, the cross and the crucifixion and all of Jesus' suffering was, despite how horrible it was, despite how I wish God would have figured out some other way, okay? But
Jesus did too.
Yeah, he did. I mean, that was the, and again, I love that the scriptures say that he even cried out, calling on the word, using the words of the psalmist, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me?
Take this cup from me. There is another way. There's another way. Let there be another way.
And that's why, again, I look at that and go, he knew. He knew. But I remind everybody that those 3 hours, dreadful hours, awful hours, awful hours, were only 3 hours. But the resurrection, it is to me, because I have never, for all of my life, I've never stuck there. I always get afraid of I'm always fearful of getting stuck there.
Stuck on the cross.
Stuck on the cross forever.
Yeah.
But it never happens. God does transform it. I mean, and every time I've been through it, all I have to do is remind myself, and again, it's not a platitude you say to somebody while they're on the cross, but you say, look for the new life, because it will get transformed.
Yeah.
I believe that as sure as I sit here, because I've seen it in my life. The cross was 3 hours, but the resurrection's forever. You know?
Oh, that's good.
You know, and again, it doesn't mean the cross is great. But I think, again, next week on Good Friday, that's what we'll be doing. We embrace the cross.
The darkness.
You know,
It's
we
the time to
embrace the cross, and it's just like, ugh. And you know, you walk up, and especially if you're on it, and you walk up and embrace it, you really would just want to kick it, you know, or scream or yell or do whatever, but you embrace it knowing that it's still going to get transformed. We got about a minute left. Wow me with something here before we get out of here.
I'll wow you. Gosh,
well, you're good at it, Aaron. You're good at it. Wow
I think
it's one of the reasons why I have you around for these conversations.
No, I don't like to do tricks for you. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that that in my darkest times, when I can't trust, when I feel like, you know, the whatever that suffering might be that has stuck to me or that I've created or someone has put upon me, I think that's when God is faithful for me. When my faith runs out, faith is a gift. It's not something I generate from within. And in the face of suffering, you know, we long for that. And I think we can pray for that. And I think God offers His grace when we are graceless. God offers light when we're in our darkness.
Yep. Amen, brother. We're going to be right back after this Mercy Minute.
Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer deaths in the U.S., and now we have an effective tool to screen for it. A low-dose CT uses a lower amount of radiation than a standard chest CT.
Breathe in.
Better detailed pictures than a chest x-ray of small abnormal areas of the lung. A person must be between 55 to 77 years old, asymptomatic, which means they don't have any symptoms such as coughing up blood, chronic cough, shortness of breath, unusual weight loss, or any other worrisome symptoms. They must also be a current smoker or have quit within the past 15 years, also must have a 30-pack year history or more, which equates to smoking 1 pack a day for 30 years, or 2 packs a day for 15 years. People generally avoid these scans, possibly due to fear of what could be found. Like many other cancers, if we can detect lung cancer early, it could be very treatable and life-saving.
Well, thank you for joining us for another Sunday morning on Faith in Our Hometown. This morning we did take a really, truly faith bent as Aaron Brown, who's the pastor over at St. Paul's, and I had a chance to talk about what is the mystery of the cross and the mystery of suffering and what value does it have in our lives and what is God doing with it? What's that all about? And again, I don't think we answered any of those questions definitively, but more had a chance to share with you. I said to Aaron on the break, you know, I love doing shows with him because we can just share faith and life, and that's part of the reason why we do this show. So we thank you for spending part of your Palm Sunday or your Passion Sunday with us. If you're in the midst of going through some suffering, at least from the Christian perspective, I just ask you to think about the fact that God can be there for you in those moments when it's difficult, and will be. And Aaron and I both believe that if you stick with it, the pain will be transformed into something else. You'll find the light in the midst of the darkness. So again, blessed Sunday, and thanks for joining us. Join us again next week for Faith in Our Hometown.
Thanks for watching. Faith in Our Hometown can be seen Sunday mornings at 6:30 and 9 a.m. on KSN. Brought to you as a community service and sponsored by Mercy Hospital, Joplin.